On this episode of What I Tell Investors, we're going to talk about professional services automation, the PSA tool. This complements the piece on remote monitoring and management, and the two are linked, but we're going to dive specifically on PSA. We're going to talk about what it is, why it's needed. We're going to talk about how it grows. We're going to talk about integrations and what they mean to the MSP and the managed services provider. We're going to talk about who the players are, and we're going to talk about how it fits with the remote monitoring and management, or RMM tool. Let's dive in. So first off, let's start with what it is, professional services automation, or PSA. As we think about it in the context of the managed services market, I'm assuming you understand what that market is, and if you don't, dive in on the video that explains that market. But we're talking about those small providers that are delivering IT services. They need a way to track their work. That's ultimately the problem that it's solving, be it the work of the technical perspective, how they're selling, how they're going to market, how they're invoicing. All of that need is delivered through the PSA. Now, this space started in the early 2000s, so much of this technology comes from that way of thinking. I've done another video called If I Was to Start an MSP Today. I approach the market a little differently now, but the legacy providers that have spent a lot of time building on this have built their businesses around a technology to do all of this work. It started with the basic ticketing need as well as the ability to bill for it. That's the core value that the PSA is bringing. You build your business process on top of that and go from there. And there's additional pieces of usefulness that come in over the evolution. But that's really the core value. You can do this with all kinds of other technologies now. The difference is that the PSA provider will tell you is that it is focused just on this market and comes from a legacy of understanding this particular market. But it is important to know that essentially these are just business process tools. A lot of larger companies, as they move in their needs, will move off of these tools to larger tools like a Salesforce or a Dynamics or other technologies that they'll run their businesses on. But typically for these smaller providers, they'll use these custom pieces of tools, or the new upstarts may be using something else. So why is it needed? Now, it's needed to manage your workforce. If you are a small provider, even if you've got just yourself or one or two techs, all the way up to teams of techs, you need to take care of what they're doing. You've got to make sure you understand all of the work that's coming in. You need to assign it out correctly. You need to make sure it happens against your agreements, the promises that you've made to your customers, be them informal, meaning I'll just service you, or against a service level agreement, or SLA. You need to be able to measure that work. You need to be able to bill for it, and you need to take the feeds of information coming in from the customers, from your other tools, and from something like a remote monitoring and management, or RMM tool, and pull them all together. That's what the PSA does. As you can see, by thinking about it from an agreements perspective, it also makes sense to extend that out into the sales process to make sure that you're tracking who both your customers and potential customers are and work through that process. You can extend it out to the marketing world, and that's where it becomes your business process management tool. The PSA legacy providers that have been around for a very long time, of course, made themselves very sticky by teaching methodologies of using their technology to run your business. Oftentimes, investors will hear from the providers that these are very sticky tools. And they are. Except they also aren't, because it isn't necessarily that difficult to take your business and run it on another piece of software. It's just the time and effort necessary to do that. That's where they have become more valuable through other pieces of integration. So what do I mean by that from the integration perspective? This is heralded as one of the big important elements of what a PSA does, particularly because the bill is so important. In fact, this has always been my number one reason to look at the PSA market when I was running an MSP, is because getting everything onto the bill is the most important thing. You've got to make sure you're justifying your value to your end customer, and so putting everything on the bill is important. So if I'm billing you for antivirus and security products and laptops and desktops and the management of those, I need everything to go onto my bills. I also, if I do proposals, I need those to go onto my bills. And the more of these technologies that come together and go onto the bill, that's the key integration. And if you think about this from a cloud world, those cloud integrations are also critically important because you got to get those cloud services bills done. In fact, if you know the enterprise space, there's tons of technologies now just to make sure you're paying the right amount on your cloud services piece if you're an enterprise or upper mid-market company. Now make that more complicated because if you're a managed services provider, you're not only dealing with those large number of providers, but you're dealing with different customers. So if I'm a big company, I only have the one customer. But if I'm an MSP, I may have 40 or 50 or 100 customers. So I've multiplied that problem even greater. It's why the idea of an integration ecosystem is an important detail of what value a PSA brings. So it's why when we look at and analyze these companies, their strength of their integration programs does matter to understand how valuable they are. Now, you've got to make a measurement about whether or not they're good at that and truly differentiated in that, and if they're building proper marketplaces. But that's where the strategy comes from and why this is an incredibly important part of the PSA story. Now let's talk about how it grows. If you've watched my MSP market video, you know I've talked about the idea of sell to and sell through products. The PSA is a sell to product, meaning that the MSP themselves consumes it and they're the person that uses it, and they don't necessarily sell that on in most cases to their end customers. It's possible if we do co-managed IT and I work with the end customer, I might sell some of my licenses to work in the same environment. But as a general rule, that's a product I use. So my growth points come from the ability to add additional users to it, generally engineers or other staff that I'm using from a billable perspective, or capacity, or any of those other pieces that you think about just from that product. Many of the PSA providers have taken different strategies on the way they monetize the other pieces. Some will charge for those integration programs I mentioned, and others will make that free as a competitive differentiation. It's just another way they can look to monetize. They're considering the idea of marketplaces, although from my perspective, they've all done a kind of poor job in creating true marketplaces in the way that we would envision them from like an AWS or an Amazon's marketplaces. But that is the strategy that's available to them when we consider that. So who are the players? Like in the RMM space, there are four major players in here. There's ConnectWise, there's Kaseya, there is SolarWinds, and there is Datto. Each has a product in that space. The two considered dominant ones from my perspective are ConnectWise and Datto with their Autotask product. Autotask was a leading independent company of that and, of course, pulled into Datto as part of Vista's roll-up to bring those and create a platform-based company. Those are the dominant ones. We have secondary level where we have companies like Synchro and Atera that are looking at this space. You can find other players like Harmony, PSA in this space as well. And then, of course, you can go out to the wider bit and say you could use something like a generic CRM or ticket and management software and even cobble things together like running it through QuickBooks. So this is all possible in that space, but it's kind of tiered. Each is positioning themselves with a different approach, slightly different. But as a general rule, when I look at anybody's offerings in this space, they're pretty much equivalent. Again, it's a maturing space. We understand what it needs from a basic offering perspective. They're kind of all the same. You're more buying into their ecosystem than you're buying in purely to their product line. So it's the way they position their community and their ecosystem more than the product technology itself. Now, what about the RMM? You can understand that the two play closely together because if the PSA is the place where we work on all the work, then what we have to do is we have to make sure all the work is coming in together. And one of those sources is the remote monitoring and management tool. Again, have a video diving in specifically into that tool and what it means for you. So if you want to dive into that, you can. But basically, if you're watching for alerts and you're watching for things that are happening from an automation perspective, that's got to flow into a workflow. That goes into the PSA. So there's often a tight integration between the two to make sure work flows back. The PSAs have made sure that they integrate with all of the RMMs. The RMMs try and integrate with most of the PSAs. So you have this matrix of integrations. But they've tried to sell themselves as an integrated ecosystem where, for example, ConnectWise led in this space by buying a company called LabTech, pulling it together, creating a single integration, saying that our stuff will work best when all tied together. They've each run a version of that and walk a careful line of making sure that they're both open and promoting their own platform. So the RMM does often go lockstep in here, and some of the providers like a Synchro are trying to make it a single product that differentiates from that perspective. But that's at a high level why the RMM matters in here and what's important about it. So that's the PSA at a high level. It's the basic tool for running your business. Now, there's an argument about how sticky it is. I'm going to dwell here for a quick second. The companies themselves will tell you how incredibly important this tool is. I'll laugh and go, of course they will, because they sell that. If you're interested in diving in a little bit more about the newer approaches and why I think this space might change a little bit, I've got a video called If I Was Starting an MSP Today, because I come at it from a different problem. If we're thinking back to the time frame when these were started, the 2003, 4, 5 time frame, the problem we were solving was we were doing a lot of desktop support, server support, because the basic platform was the operating system. With the move into the cloud, the basic platform that we're playing on now is much more at the business layer. Microsoft 365, GCP, Zoom, Salesforce, whatever that business platform is, we're playing more at that level. These tools, while relevant, are less so and could be done with a more generic tool. You could do this with a basic CRM or a user experience management tool, maybe not with all of the same specific integrations, but it is possible. And if your approach is a little differently, you're going to be valuing different things, particularly the customer relationship, where these tools are much more focused on the internal business process. For example, they're not great at doing things like communicating out through social media. They require add-ons in order to interact via texting or chat bots. So they have not necessarily done those things that make them a true user experience management platform. And there's an opportunity here for some level of disruption. But that's topics for other videos. Thanks for listening. If you like it, go ahead and hit like. Hit that subscribe button. I do a ton of material covering the IT services market, and I deliver a daily podcast called The Business of Tech, which is all the news about technology through the lens of those IT service providers. So if you're interested in learning more, you can listen to the issues that matter to them and go from there. There's videos here on the YouTube channel giving you insights into the kind of issues that they are providing and what they're thinking about in terms of the way they deliver their services. If you need more information, go ahead and visit mspradio.com. You can reach out and get in touch with me, and I'm always happy to answer more questions. Thanks for listening.